Welcome to the Marshall Pruitt Podcast, presented by Cooper Tires, supported by PNC Bank in our Week in IndyCar series. My guest this week, Conor Daly, who's had a rather, we'll just say interesting week or so, and Zach Veatch, who definitely starred last weekend at the Gateway IndyCar event. Catch up with the two of those guys here shortly. Both will be calling in. Couple of interesting topics to get to beforehand, and looking at all that has taken place over the past week. It's I don't want to say this is the easiest time IndyCar's been through in the modern era. If we think about that span from Sunday, August 19th, when Robert Wickens crashed, through Friday, the 24th, in the news of what Conor had gone through with his sponsor Eli Lilly pulling their branding off of his car, what Conor's father Derek dealt with in being incorrectly named as the source of a racial slur, then coming clean on something that he did admit to saying, but to a different reporter, on the topic of Robert's health and status, on probably the biggest question of all, that being super speedway, if not track safety in general, but the use of fences and mesh to keep cars and drivers within the track in the event of an accident like Robert suffered. It's just been a lot. I know the emotional toll suffered in particular by those within the paddock. Yeah, I would say fans as well. It's been a tough week. From racial aspects to driver safety to what can we do to make the cars safer. Then we had the crash this past weekend at the Spa Formula One race. We saw their mandated halo was a very, very effective tool. Some admittedly dumb or short-sighted or just convenient comments from ex-Formula One driver Felipe Massa that came in trying to tear down IndyCar a little bit on its status of safety endeavors and commitment and whatnot. Let's just say that it makes me think back to a week of, the Indianapolis Grand Prix in early May, which was just pretty darn simple. There wasn't much going on. There was no real drama or concerns. Think back to Long Beach. What a great race. Alexander Rossi won. California boy, fantastic. Wind the clock forward a bit, and from Robert to ovals, driver safety, halos, aero screens, fences and poles, Derek Daly, Wish TV, Conor Daly, Eli Lilly, Felipe Massa. Lots. A little bit too much. Whether it's anger, frustration, bewilderment, lots to process. Mention right here, thank you to everyone who sent in such nice and complimentary things about last week's episode. I had my friend and NBCSN pal Lee Diffie as my guest and co-pilot. I knew that Lee would be the perfect guy to walk through the very troubling aspects of what took place at Pocono, and Lee, I think, was just phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. So thank you again for all the kind comments, but especially thanks to Lee for being the perfect person to handle many situations that we discussed in a classy and sensitive manner. As I mentioned at the outset, we're definitely thankful to Cooper Tires and PNC Bank for their ongoing support. Have a fun event this weekend coming up on Saturday at 5:30 p.m. at Portland. Another Marshall Pruitt Podcast live event. We are doing our Week in IndyCar live on the Cooper stage in the support paddock, and I should hopefully have seen or will be able to see plenty of graphics as to where that is with what I've been tweeting out and putting on Facebook and such. We will have Dario Franchitti, Sebastian Bourdais, and Will Power as our guests. So altogether, I believe that is 9 IndyCar championships and 4 Indy 500 wins. And also, by sheer coincidence, we have Will, who agreed to this before he won Saturday night in Gateway, and Seb, who finished last Saturday night at Gateway. So we've got both ends of the finishing order from Gateway, and then plus the man with the best hair, and all motor racing, Dario Franchitti in between. So if you're in Portland, I really hope you come out. Again, 5:30 on Saturday in the support paddock, just on the other side of the bridge. So if you're walking towards the bridge to go over and go into the IndyCar paddock, we're not in the IndyCar paddock, we're just on the other side, the support paddock. Basically, when the drivers are coming out of the final corner on driver's left, that is where we will be, just inside the paddock there. So lots of fun, and with that said, we'll be right back. PNC is proud to sponsor Scott Dixon, driver of the number 9 car for Chip Ganassi Racing. Everyone tunes in on race day, but so much of the race is determined off camera during the work put in throughout the week, month, and year. From the gym to the practice track, Scott Dixon and the team take small steps every day to get closer to victory lane. Copyright 2018, the PNC Financial Services Group Incorporated. All rights reserved. PNC Bank, National Association, member FDIC. Let's cover off a few other things before we have Conor calling in. On the topic of big oval safety, what we should be using to try and not only retain cars but not injure drivers. A lot of comments, a lot of thoughts on what should be done, what shouldn't be done. One of the more common suggestions was double the height of the safer barrier, and I can't see how that would be a negative in most instances. One of the more interesting comments that I received, and Robin received as well from an IndyCar engineer, was saying, beyond that, why don't we think about the places where poles and catch fencing is needed and might not be needed on some of these big ovals? Because if we look at where Robert's crash took place, there are no fans allowed there. There's no seating, there's no grandstands, there's no anything. Yet we have this fence and pole system, which did keep him inside the track, but also caused exceptional damage, physical damage, and obviously vehicular damage. And that engineer said, why not a wall? Why not just a very simple, basic wall? Since there's nothing for fans to see through there, there's really nothing that would be obstructed. There's no one really out there looking in to need to see through anything. Why don't we think about other places where, like where Robert crashed, we could erect just a regular wall? And he wasn't talking about exotic materials. I'm not claiming to know what's best, whether it's steel sheeting, cement, bricks. Again, I don't know. I'm not claiming what should be used, but I thought it was a really simple approach to one of the problems. Not saying it would solve every problem by any stretch of the imagination, but if we had something that was tall and would keep cars in without entangling and causing many of the issues that came from Robert's accident and some others that we've seen, could that be something for us to explore? There's the knock-on effect. There's no perfect solution. What if a car gets up into that wall, rides off of it, comes back down, lands on top of another? So again, there's no perfect solution. Then there's the topic of cost. If we're looking at a 1 mile, 1.5, 2.5 mile oval, it's a lot of distance. It's a lot of building materials needed to do whatever. So not saying that there's any perfect solution, but I do hope that some of the big reaction we saw last week, lots of tweets, lots of comments, lots of opinions on what should be done. One of the things Lee and I discussed was these things tend to have a big natural cycle where things flare up, huge passionate responses, as we should have, and then unfortunately there seems to be the inevitable wane of that big emotional response. We've got to change things, got to make things better. At least recording this on a Tuesday morning, waking up this week, I haven't seen the sustained nature of this. So maybe that's something that myself and others need to keep pushing, and you as well, if you believe this is something that needs to be improved. We also come back to one of the more practical things. We lost Dan Weldon, obviously. We can run down the list of all the people that have either been very hurt and injured in a crash by getting up into fencing or poles, those that have died. And in almost every instance, the same responses come. So what has happened with Robert, by no means the first time. But we often come back to, okay, who's in charge? Who pays for it? Who can actually make it happen? If we look at Formula One, some of the comments from Massa, some of the comments from others saying, hey, in Formula One we have a different type of barrier system that would be better than what you have in IndyCar. You should consider using that. We don't have an FIA that is immensely rich. We don't have Formula One series and WEC and Rally. We don't have, at least if we're talking IndyCar, even just North America, we don't have a bunch of big, hugely financially prosperous series paying into one central sanctioning body and organization that also has and leads safety standards that can then go back and dictate, before we race at your track, you must upgrade this to that, change this here, replace all of these things. We don't have that. And it's not an excuse, it's just an explanation of reality. NASCAR is its own independent sanctioning body. It owns many tracks. It has set those tracks to the standards that they believe. They do also comply with some international standards, don't get me wrong, but there's no international agency that can force them to do anything for the tracks that they own. And some of the other independently owned tracks. And I'm talking ovals for the most part. But there's no central body that says, for 2019, all of this must be thrown away and replaced with that, or else no motor racing will take place. In Formula One, that is absolutely the case. Whatever the FIA dictates gets done. And if they want to or decide to invest their own money, they have that money, huge pool of money to invest. I don't see that same ability in NASCAR and in IndyCar to do things at the same level as the FIA and F1 with the tracks they visit. But I would say most of all, it's that lack of a central agency to say, nope, poles and mesh fence and this kind of stuff, that's just barbaric. We're going to replace it with this. Maybe that thing will be established. Maybe that real leverage point will come to pass at some point in my lifetime. We just don't have it now. And I know that's a source of frustration. So while we can say we need to go to ballistic Lexan like they have at hockey rinks, you go, great. I think as I mentioned last week on the podcast, former IndyCar CEO Randy Bernard did some initial investigation after hearing that's something that should be done. And the number that he got back was something like $45 million in materials alone to outfit a larger oval. That's just not money that any track, since those tracks are not owned, except for IMS, by IndyCar, but for the most part, it's not something any track has sitting in its bank to spend. So I fear this is going to be a point of frustration for longer than any of us would want it to be. On the topic of Robert, I can tell you that having been in Monterey last weekend covering the vintage event, and this actually goes on for 2 weeks there, but just about everybody I came across asked how he was doing, wanted to know about him, his health status and such, and it was just really sweet to see. By and large, most of these folks don't know him, never met him, only seen his performances on TV in the car or speaking outside of it. This year, as he's come to IndyCar, it's just a little bit of a unexpected referendum on the impact Robert Wickens has had on North American motor racing. When you can go to a vintage racing event where there's still a lot of modern folks who show up from an IndyCar paddock or whatever other paddock, but so many folks are not only concerned about him, but it was clear that Robert had connected with them just, from thousands of miles away, that this guy was doing things that really impressed them before he got hurt and has made a very lasting impression on them. So it's really sweet to see how much people cared about a person that, by and large, they never even met. So we're going to get into some areas with Conor here coming up. One of the areas which is maybe more for his father, maybe we will have this as a conversation point in a future podcast with Derek. So we have this, I think, universally agreed situation that my pal Robin Miller wrote about, and is probably going to be the most popular thing posted on Racer.com ever, his opinion piece about the BS that took place in reaction to Derek's firing, the just really weak stance taken by Wish TV, what Derek has described as a complete error in being named as the person, Bob Lamey, the fired Indianapolis Colts announcer, who said that Derek, was the person that he interviewed who used the N-word. Got to admit, I spent a little bit of time taking a look at the Wish TV website last night, and they have their I-Team 8, their investigative journalism folks. And this is for the TV side, at least, not necessarily just folks working on the website, but really interesting scenario where I watched they sent their I-Team 8 reporter to go and investigate someone who traded in a car at a local dealership and then received a letter from the Indiana DMV saying that his license had been suspended because his car had been found abandoned in the street and was blocking traffic, and he couldn't understand how that was the case because he had traded the car in, and this I-Team 8 person and the folks mobilized behind this, so we're talking a reporter, we're talking camera people and sound and lighting, and saw an interview with multiple people, the man, someone from the DMV, a lawyer, you name it, all about getting into the fact that when he traded in his car, he only signed over the legal rights to the dealership, and his name was still on the car's actual registry. This is a person who, when this car was traded in, I guess someone else bought it. I'm not exactly sure what happened there, but although he had basically given up the car and traded in for something else, his name was still on the registration, was still legally responsible for it, and when the next person who had the car had abandoned it or whatever, well, the DMV didn't really care, and he ended up paying the price. I found this to be a really interesting thing, something as inane as this. The Wish TV folks seemed motivated enough, and there are other stories like this on their website about a 10-year-old who had their tooth improperly pulled by a doctor, which they investigated with vigor, willing to do all of that. Yet when it comes to spending half of the time, half of the resources, to actually investigate whether Derek Daly was the source of that N-word that Bob Lamey said was spoken by him, I don't work for them, so there is maybe a bit of an assumption here, but at least externally, it looks like there was more effort given to investigate a guy getting his driver's license suspended by the DMV through some weird laws and loopholes in vehicle trade-in practices than actually finding out if a man who's worked for the network, for that station I should say, for 30 years was being accurately or falsely charged of something that he said 35 years ago. So if we're talking robustness and willingness to actually dedicate the I-Team 8 investigative department to something, looks like there wasn't nearly as much interest or effort. Again, could be wrong. I'm alleging this, not stating this, that this might not have received nearly as much attention. And we're talking about a man's career and reputation. I don't want to say destroyed, because I think he's going to recover from this, but sullied for sure, because folks are willing to take one side of a story, one person's accusation, and sever ties with someone. 30 years of a relationship. I just found that to be ridiculous. So we know they have the investigative resources. Curious if they applied the same level of vigor and desire to get to the root of what did or didn't happen with Derek, as they would with a 10-year-old having a tooth pulled at the doctor. So that's my little rant here. Another thing that I will mention, and I think this might have been lost just a little bit, and then we're going to get on to naming who has won our question of the week. You talk about things that Derek said 35 years ago, and how him not understanding what he said, and so on and so forth. Knowing Derek, I have no doubt that he was completely ignorant in saying what he said. I think there's a little bit of danger, though, in painting such things as being old-timey and things said back in 1983 in IndyCar. I realize this is off to the side a little bit of this exact topic, but I know exactly where to go in the paddock this weekend at Portland if I want to hear that same word spoken. Many folks know where to go in the paddock to hear that word spoken. I would say things have improved drastically since I last worked in IndyCar full-time on the team side 16, 17 years ago. I know what it was like back then. And it was not reserved to racial slurs. It could be based on gender, sexuality, faith, you name it, colorful language. And I'm not just talking curse words. I'm talking things that today, if you said them, would get you fired. Or suspended, or if a sponsor overheard someone saying these things today, would have sponsors likely pull out. Definitely important to draw a line in saying that Derek, new to this country, new to everything, was set straight by our Robin Miller immediately and learned what he said was not acceptable at any point in time. We'd also be painting a false view that this is just an old-timey thing that happened then and doesn't still happen today. Things are way better. I can tell you that from personal experience. But again, I know exactly where to go if I want to hear that word spoken by some folks in the paddock whose thought processes might not have evolved at the same rate as some others. Let's see. We have one other thing, too, that I think is really important to mention, and that is this is the final weekend for Mazda as a title sponsor for the Mazda Road to Indy. And if there is love to give and appreciation to offer, I would say that for all that Mazda has done, I think the past 8 years or so, 8 or 9 years with the specific Mazda Road to Indy, but even before that in Champ Car with the Atlantic Series there, and offering of prize money and graduation. I mean, millions have been spent by Mazda. I don't know which brand, whether it's automotive or which company will replace them as title sponsor for the road to Indy, but there is a definite sense of sadness that when we are done and the Mazda Road to Indy races are finished this weekend at Portland, that our dear friends at Mazda will be bidding farewell to a series that they have really helped elevate and make incredibly important, much more important than I think it has just about ever been. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and look at our question of the week from last week, where we pick my favorite. That came in from Eric Harkrader, who asked Lee Diffie and I to talk about the practices, accepted policies of relaying information in an incident like Robert Wickens. He also asked about where PT fell in that, since PT got in some fairly hot water for making some proclamations about Robert's physical status before the series, before the team had mentioned anything. And Eric, I think that really did just open up some great dialogue that Lee shed a lot of information on, and I shared some input as well on that topic. So drop me a little DM here. Tell me what size Marshall Pruitt podcast, The Week in IndyCar t-shirt you would like, and our friends at TorontoMotorsports.com will send you whatever it is, whatever size fits you the best. And just another quick note for Derek Koska, who owns TorontoMotorsports.com. They've been kind of the best, I don't want to say secret, but one of the best kept secrets in IndyCar. They've been doing the really fun stickers for a while now, and caricatures, and you name it, with Roger Warwick as the artist behind all of that. Very, very awesome to see the Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports team reach out to them and say, hey, could you come up with a some sort of tribute or get well soon type thing for Robert. And not only did they do that, but Sam Schmidt said, hey, we would also like to take all the proceeds from that and put that towards his long-standing Paralysis Foundation. So some great donations taking place there. Thank you to Derek. Thank you to Raja for coming up with the artwork and their hats being sold. You name it. all kinds of merchandise going on at TorontoMotorsports.com, where the proceeds directly help an initiative that Sam has been behind for decades, trying to help with paralysis research. So great stuff going on there. Great to see the DTM series sending over a photo with all the drivers supporting Robert, and an F1 with people in here and there. It's a tough time, as I opened with. I don't want to paint this in any kind of false manner, but we do at least get a stronger feeling for what kind of community we have based on how folks respond during very tough times. And I would say that 99% of what I've seen regarding Robert, what folks have said, the actions they've done, the SPM team spending their own money to commission things to celebrate Robert and also have a charitable aspect. Tough times, but I would say you can also feel pretty darn good about the people who have been stepping up and really showing their love for folks in those tough times. All right, let's get going with our man. Speaking of tough times, let's get going with our man, Conor Daly. You lead a boring life. I never read anything about you. No one ever says anything about you on social media. No headlines are made. What's it feel like, just having this really boring life where nothing goes on?
Yeah. I mean, all those things.
What have you learned about yourself over the last 6-7 days, man? Or I might be wrong in the exact count, but...
Well, in this racing world, I've come to realize that there will always be new things that will surprise you. I mean, I'm mind blown constantly by the way people act, by the way what people say, by how business is conducted, and sure enough, my career has had some very just wild, strange, realistically just bad luck, unfortunate type of scenarios that I really don't get or understand why they happen. But yeah, sure enough, this weekend there was a whole new situation that in my life I was never thought we would be involved in. So yeah, I mean, it's still very hard to believe that anything like this even happened to like my family, or it's just a weird, it's hard to know what to say. It's just awkward. It's just like, why is this even happening? There's no point in any of this. Yeah, there's no point in certainly the reaction that took place, and it doesn't help anyone, essentially, the way events transpired. So it was pretty wild.
Have to admit, you were given, I think, almost carte blanche. If you wanted to load both barrels and fire away on social media and call out all kinds of people and use all kinds of unholy words, I think you would have been given the green light, and folks would have forgiven you because so much of what happened was rather asinine. What impressed me the most is, despite probably knowing you could lash out and have lots of support from people, you actually took things in a classier direction and thanked the Eli Lilly folks and were positive in your messaging when you didn't necessarily have to be. Tell me about that decision, because that spoke to maturity that, for those who didn't know it existed within you, was definitely on display.
Well, the fact that that there's already this opinion that maturity doesn't exist within me is it's funny. I mean, I get it. I try to be I do sort of do things very much on the edge of what people think is acceptable. Certainly in the racing world, where everyone has to be cookie cutter and very never smile, don't do anything that you shouldn't do outside of going to the gym and tweeting about it every day. But I do. #
rise and grind, bro. Sorry,
well,
I had to throw that in.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we all do those things as drivers. You know, I train, we do things, but I am very professional in this, you know, in this way of, you know, doing business. I mean, I'm on the phone every day with companies and with people who I'm trying to get involved on the business side. So, you know, what I produce on the internet is, you know, the internet is very much an entertainment sector. It's very much like people follow you on social media to be entertained, or if they want to find out news or something. You know, it's not just, I don't know. I mean, I've always tried to be something that's just entertaining, and you know, but there also is the professional side, and that's, you know, in this situation, there was no reason to be unprofessional about it because of the opportunity that had still been provided to me, you know, by racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, and you know, there was obviously support for, you know, 2 Indy 500s that I've done. So, you know, that I obviously am in a very delicate time in my career as well, to where, you know, we want to make sure that there's something, you know, that there are good things being said at some point, because I still, you know, want to be racing full time next year. I want to be driving something. I don't know what it is. I don't care what it is. And at some point, there's going to be a business, you know, side to that has to happen to force my way in somewhere. So, you know, I think there's plenty of things I could have said yes. There's plenty of things I want to say. There's plenty of things that my family and I say to each other about the whole scenario, but there's no reason to be negative about it. There's no reason to be publicly, you know, throwing a fit, because again, like the situation and the decision that was made, it wouldn't help anyone.
And as folks probably know, we try not to get too deep into folks' pockets and some of the contractual things that are not meant for the light of day. Maybe you could shed a little bit of light on one aspect, Conor, and this was reported by Ace newspaperman Dave Kalman and a few others that might bring some clarity. From what I understand, although Eli Lilly chose to take their branding off the car, I believe their contractual support, you know, the actual sponsorship exchange, still took place, which in theory would have been the thing that allowed you to keep racing for Roush Fenway Racing last weekend, albeit without their logos on the car. Does that sound about right?
I don't actually know the exact contractual, you know, obligations, because my contract was with the team directly. So, you know, I don't know how it happened, but obviously, you know, if there wasn't funding in place, I don't think the team would have run the car. So obviously, you know, there was still, you know, Lilly had still made sure that there was, you know, a situation for me to race. I think there was other options considered, but in the end, we ended up still being able to move forward, thanks to really a lot of work by the Roush team, sort of overnight Thursday night. And you know, it was a thrash Friday morning, but you know, they were able to get it done, and you know, I appreciate, you know, the effort from them for sure.
We've moved to a somewhat new format, Conor, since you were on the week in IndyCar last time, where other than maybe a couple of upfront questions, for the most part we are looking to our listeners and their questions to drive the conversation. So let's move over there right away. And it's been really cool to see a lot of folks are just curious about your first foray into NASCAR racing. We're also hoping we're not losing you here, so we'll talk about that in a minute too. But let's start off with Michael McHugh, who says, for Conor, how is it adjusting to a stock car on a track that you've driven on with an IndyCar before, that being Road America? And he said, also, are there other racing opportunities on the horizon?
I mean, very different right off the bat. But it is still a race car. I mean, that, you know, a lot of people kept saying, "Oh, it must be totally different." I was like, well, you still have to brake late, you have to roll speed, and you have to get a good exit. Like, it's, you know, it's still, there's still some of the same characteristics apply. It's just a matter of feeling the limit of the roll. You know, the body rolls a lot. The spring package is obviously very different. The chassis is built differently. It's very heavy. And of course, practice session 1 was rained out, so who needs practice time when you've never driven something like that, obviously. That would just be irresponsible to have enough time to get used to something in my career. So yeah, I mean, still by the end of the race, we're learning. I mean, every stint in the race sort of started figuring out a few more things. There's so much, though, and even in IndyCar races, you have access to pit lane every session, right? So we're coming in, you're getting used to the pit box, you're getting used to where you need to stop on the marks. I didn't stop in the pit box once until race day, until the first race stop, and I had no idea where I was going to be stopping, how they wanted me to stop, what it was like to stop with their cars around me. And so I would, the first 2 stops, and I didn't know that, like, the steering became a lot stiffer, and power steering doesn't seem to work as much when you're coming into the pits for a stop. And it was a very, it's not possible to know those things without going through them. So, for me, it was a lot of fun, though, because the race, it wasn't like an IndyCar race. If you lose a spot in the pits, sometimes you could be screwed. There were 48 restarts, it felt like, and every single restart I passed like 10 cars, and so you'd immediately gain everything back that you lost in the pits, and it was an enjoyable experience for sure.
So you called in right after getting off the phone with a long post-race debrief with the Roush Fenway team. Wouldn't ask you to uncork any of the stuff you shouldn't, but although your finish in the race wasn't what you'd hoped it to be, I believe there was a mechanical issue of some sort, you were definitely quick like a bunny. Did the post-race debrief go the way you'd hoped? And did the Roush Fenway team seem to appreciate the fact that they did have a guy who, even a fish out of water scenario, you definitely showed him something first time out?
Yeah, I think so. I think it went well. I mean, Kevin Kidd, my crew chief, he did a really good job, and he had a lot of, I was really appreciative. He had a lot of nice things to say in the debrief, and I think it gives, their full-time guys sort of another opinion on the car, because I think, they know that they don't necessarily have, a P1 pace at the moment, and most of the tracks they go to, they're very close. So, there's a couple, small bits of information that, I sort of reinforced for, Ryan and Ty, and but I think honestly in the race, we were in a really good position to finish in the top 5, and that's, I would have been very, very happy with that, and I could have really used the prize money, but of course, didn't end up being that way. It was very much like the Road America race in 2016 with our suspension failure. It was something very similar. In the NASCAR, just something snaps, and all of a sudden, the car is undrivable anymore. So, it was a shame, but I think, I hope they were impressed. Will it mean anything for the future? Who knows? But I think I did my job. I kept the thing in one piece, and we had a really good, race while it lasted.
Another thing that might be interesting, I don't think we got any questions on this, but knowing that you did go through some very trying times during this debut, and the fact that a fair number of folks might have read about some of the sponsor-related items, have you had any new companies or other companies reach out either during or after the event to say, let's talk?
I would say actually yes, but we're only on day 2 of the week adventure after the weekend, you know what I mean? So it's only, only Tuesday, second business day of the week. I think in many situations there are a lot of times where people think, oh, for sure people must be hitting you up for sponsorship after the amazing race or after this and that. And it's like, no, people don't do that. People don't hand out money anymore. You know what I mean? It's a difficult game, no matter what you've gone through, no matter what the situation is. But thankfully, I would say this whole situation got even more PR and spread more worldwide than the amazing race did. I mean, it was unbelievable. So I have been hit up by at least one CEO, which is exciting. But obviously, deals to race don't happen overnight. So, we're very close to the end of the season now, and my focus has been on 2019 really since May. But I've just happened to be tossed into a couple more IndyCar races and a NASCAR race. So that's been all nice additions. But realistically, all I want to do is focus on, getting back to having a full-time job.
So if we look at the rest of the IndyCar season, there are 2 races left. We've got a number of questions from folks asking, in some way, shape, or form, do you think you'll be back in an IndyCar for either Portland this weekend or Sonoma 2 weeks after that?
I mean, I wish I could say yes. I didn't even think I'd be in at Pocono. It's all business related. I mean, it's, no one's going to be, hired to drive those cars to finish off the year. I mean, I had sponsorship help to be in the Harding car. That's what they needed, and I don't have that anymore. So it's tough. I mean, it's so not what people want it to be. If there's openings, teams aren't out there having, the casting calls, for drivers, right? It's not like that, sadly. So, I'm going to keep doing what I can to try and, position myself in the most attractive way to teams. And, that's going to be if I come with bows of $100 bills around my arms and legs. But yeah, and I'm not really concerned about finishing off this year. I've done my job this year. I've got in and gone quick and done what I could do in situations that I've had. So I just want to focus on, having a strong 2019 program, if that's possible.
Next question's from Daniel Kincaid, and it might be a little bit more from me. Daniel says, hey, read your article about the Dragon Speed team in IndyCar, and this was Dragon Speed team owner Elton Julian talking about not only wanting to come to IndyCar next year, but reaching out to IndyCar's Jay Fry, asking for some support in making direct connections to IndyCar's 2 engine suppliers. So Daniel asked, how does the process of obtaining an engine lease happen? He says, it seems like the entrant goes through IndyCar, and IndyCar acts as a medium between the team and the OEM. Is this correct? It sometimes, Daniel. In this case, with Elton being unfamiliar with the IndyCar paddock, this is probably the smartest way to go. Work through the series. For others, you have relationships sometimes. You take a Michael Shank, for example, who was working with Honda and Acura. Obviously, there's a relationship there. Spoke with HPD, engine supply happened, here we go. But in many cases, it's just relationships and direct. Honestly, I think the going through IndyCar angle might actually be the rarity. So, let's see, where should we go next? Here we go, Ben Cohen, a perfect question. After your weekend up in Elkhart Lake, if you could have only one for the rest of the life, which would you choose? Spotted Crow or your favorite Indy brew? And he says, nice work this past weekend, and best of luck moving forward. So what kind of beer, if you could only choose one, would you have?
You mean Spotted Cow up there in Wisconsin?
Yes. Or your favorite Indy brew?
It's hard to say. I get judged if people think I like beer or something. So.
Oh, that's right. We forgot. He's in church all the time. He's working out or praying. He doesn't drink alcohol. He doesn't eat food because there's calories in that. Let's see. Here's one. Here's one that includes something for Zach Veatch, our other guest, who we'll be speaking to shortly. Eric Harkrader asks, can Conor curl Zach's weight more time than Zach can bench Conor's? That's an interesting one, because, you might not be the tallest guy in the world, but you're a burly little bastard, so I bet you could curl Veach if you really wanted to.
I don't know. I think we should get ESPN Sports Science here and something of that nature. I could probably curl Zach Veach. I don't know. He's beefing up though. He's doing his yoga and weightlifting and stuff like that.
Interesting. Let's see. All right, Daniel Ferris, and I'm going to ask this to Zach a little bit later, and I'll probably just leave this one right for you. Daniel Ferris says, for the both of you, if you could have one superhero ability, what would it be and why? And who would you choose as your sidekick?
Well, repeat that question?
If you could have one superhero ability, what would it be and why? And who would you choose as your sidekick?
Okay, superhero. I want to be able to create money out of nothing, and that would be my superpower. And my sidekick would be, I don't like. Does it have to be a real sidekick, or just like anyone as a sidekick?
I would say anyone, in theory.
So, like, I could pick, like, James Hinchcliffe as a sidekick or something like that.
Yeah, former landlord. That could work.
Yeah, maybe. I like, he was a really good wingman while we were single gentlemen, so that'd be fine.
Wow, cracking open the door in that one, are you? All right, I see how it's going here.
He's engaged now, so we can talk about it.
Yeah, we need to get you married off. Then you can't talk about all past transgressions. All right. Tory Claret, great question here. He says, Marshall, why don't we see more vintage Indy cars being run at events like Monterey, where I was last weekend, or Goodwood, or others? He says, you see old vintage F1 cars and sports cars all day long, but where are the old kart cars or Indy cars from the 80s and 90s? It's a great question, Tory, and I wonder that almost every year there's one or two organizations that do specialize in older Indy cars. At Gateway, actually, if I'd been there, the Vintage Indy Registry had a bunch of cars that they were running, which is pretty awesome. But I do have to wonder why every year at the Monterey Motorsports reunion at lovely Laguna Seca with a huge IndyCar history, there is not some form of dedicated IndyCar class. So, yeah, I wonder about that as well. Let's see. Where should we go next? Here's an interesting one, and, I don't know how far you want to go into this, but Mike Jablow asks, Marshall, recent reports indicated that Harding Racing has old damper technology. What's the difference between what they have and the latest dampers that the top teams have? You want to take, I can answer that, but you want to take that one? Because it might be interesting compare and contrast from the driver's cockpit.
Well, I think the first thing that you could notice is that, the teams like Penske, Andretti, and Ganassi, they have full-time dedicated damper engineers, damper technicians. And if you look at, I was pitted next to the Penske team in Pocono, and you just look at their cars on the setup pad, right? Their dampers are, they're massive. Like, they're big situations, like they're big, like the springs are even different than what we're running on our car. Total different, just everything, like a different profile, a different characteristic to how they're built, and ours are just very older school, and that's what we have, and you got to remember, damper development is open. It's not like IndyCar says, hey, you can only spend $1,000 on your dampers a year, right? It's like, yeah, you can do whatever.
It's the one big area on the chassis itself that teams can influence, and obviously the big development damping-wise, which has really been part of the Dallara DW12 era, has been the use of dampers with inerters. And that's commonplace with almost every entry in the field. Being the guy without them.
Even on top of that as well, you see that damper and you're like, oh, well, hang on, there's like three-way adjustable on the Penske, or there's different ways you can adjust them. But there's also a lot that you can do inside of that damper that you can't even see that is so effective. That is, stuff right now that we actually cannot tune because we don't have the pieces inside the damper that we need to use. So that stuff, when you're talking about hundredths of a second, no one's going to drive around that. Like, this is so competitive now in IndyCar. Like, you have a level of grip that you have, and it's scientifically not possible to get more because there's just there's certain technology levels that are available to some and not available to others. So I think that is still not common knowledge to the everyday race viewer.
And that's a reason why a Penske car or a Ganassi or some of the, whether it's better funded or more established teams with more complete engineering offices and equipment on the car to then use, that's why some cars will be faster and have sector times that are, say, more impressive in the corners or even under braking or acceleration, all areas where damper technology really, really influences performance, will be faster than those that maybe have a smaller budget, can't afford as many engineers, don't have a dedicated damper guy possibly, or in this case just have those things plus older dampers as well. So yeah, just trying harder. Everyone's trying as hard as they can. That's the thing. You are driving at 100% against everyone else who's at 100%. And if it's not as if you can drive at 105% to compensate. You can do that for a little bit, and then there will be a yellow flag, and you will be climbing out of the car because it will be smashed. So,
a sort of a more common way to think about it too these days is it's almost like Formula One. You know, people that watch Formula One always know that a Sauber is not going to win the race, right? Like, it's probably not going to happen, and there's certain reasons why. And you know, thankfully in IndyCar, the smaller teams, they do have a chance. You know, every so often there might be a situation, whether it's raining or whether, you know, the track conditions have really surprised people, where some of the smaller teams might have a decent shot at getting towards the front. But very rarely do we see them now. You know, we see Dale Coyne Racing winning races now because guess where they invested a lot of their money? The damper program and everything involved there. So, you know, we still consistently see Andretti, Penske, and Ganassi winning races, and I think that's, you know, it's a testament to where they know they can develop speed.
All right, let's grab some more questions here, and you got a lot of fun ones. Jordan Darwin has two. First one is, Conor, you've driven the Chevy and Honda IndyCar V6s. How do they differ from the driver's seat?
It's very difficult to tell now. I mean, now that the aero kits are the same, I mean, I can't really say to you exactly this year, because I've driven both a Chevy and a Honda now on the Super Speedway package, which I guess you could compare easily. You know, Chevy seemed to obviously have the advantage at the Indy 500, and then I switched to Chevy, and Honda seemed to have the advantage at Pocono. So it must be a problem with my life.
They're going wherever you aren't. Yep.
But yeah, I think there's some sort of giant coup to get me out of IndyCar, but I don't know. I don't think there's. Both engine manufacturers do such a good job, and they're so competitive that everyone's always pushing. So, you know, I can't really say that one beats the other right now for sure, because everyone's just working constantly to try and get better.
Jordan also has a follow-up question, which is pretty cool. He says, Conor, what can we do as fans to help support you in an effort for you to secure a full-time ride in IndyCar?
You know, I love that question because I get it a lot, and I really appreciate it. I mean, there's an incredible group of people, you know, out there who are so supportive of me, and I can't thank them enough, because it's, you know, at some point, you know, you want to see, you know, your driver, I guess, you know, get that break, get that successful chance, and you know, and I'm working on that. I wish there were more. You know, things that the fans could do. You know, I don't know whether or not the teams, you know, it's not a question of, you know, a fan favorite is not going to get a ride, right? Like, it doesn't make business sense. It doesn't make, you know, sense to some people. Obviously, there has to be more reasons than that. And, you know, I'm obviously trying to make those business reasons come together, you know, with partners like, you know, the U.S. Air Force, or, you know, whether it was Lilly Diabetes or anyone else in the future. You know, if there was a GoFundMe, it's hard to do those because every team has a different asking price and for certain races, and you never really can actually reveal that, because then some people will get mad because some people are getting charged more and some people wouldn't. So it's you know, it's tough. It's tough, but all I can do is keep saying thank you. And, maybe at some point it will pay off, because if it does, it'll be very helpful for the partners that are involved, in supporting, my racing efforts.
Well, we should just crowdfund your way. That would actually be a really interesting thing to see. Crowdfunding, I think when I think of it in general terms, it's, hey, we're trying to buy, the local whatever club some new thing, the barn needs replacing or whatever it is. Wonder how people would respond when we're talking about a $6 million budget to get in with a midfield IndyCar team.
Exactly.
That might
and that's the hard part. Yeah, it's like, who on earth is going to give, you're like, oh, well, if you have 70,000 followers and each of them gave $100, it's like, yeah, a quarter of them would give $100. You know what I mean? Like, not even. Like, we gotta think of numbers here. It's tough. It's a tough game.
Here's one, Conor, that we've been getting a number of times since May, when IndyCar announced that the future engine regulations, as they desire, will reach an ultimate peak of 1,000 horsepower. This comes in from Scott Wharton, who says, with the larger engine displacement and greater horsepower that is set to come in the next few years, are you concerned that the added horsepower could potentially be a safety issue due to the increased speed?
Absolutely not. I don't think so. I trust our safety team and our development, when it comes to, chassis safety, or whether it's, I still don't like the halo or the windscreen or anything. I'm just content with the fact that what we do is dangerous. But I obviously, I'm probably the minority opinion on that. But
here we go again with another Daly talking about minorities. Jesus, man, I'm telling you what.
Yep.
Sorry, couldn't let that one go.
You, not me. That was you, not me.
Sorry.
But yeah, I think the more power, the better. The NASCAR I just drove had a ton of power. That thing, we're spinning the tires off every corner. You know what I mean? And it's cool. It's fun to be able to, do that. I think IndyCar, though, there will be certain things that probably need to be done differently, I assume, because of, at ovals, what do you do? Is there, everyone was complaining about how the racing wasn't awesome this year because of, less downforce and stuff like that. But it might have just been because of how the drag was produced as well. We had a lot of drag for not a lot of downforce, and it was just sort of, I don't know. I'd be curious to see what the series technical leaders of the series would have to say. But I'm all for more horsepower. Just bolt it on, let's go. Because we're modern day gladiators out there doing 240 plus. So let's make that even more.
It's also, for me, always worth reminding folks that we're not going to 900 horsepower or 1,000 for the first time this century. You listen back to good old Uncle Bobby. Listen to Bobby Unser talking about turbo Offenhauser development in the early 70s and how John Miller was cranking out more than 1,000 horsepower back when I was 2 years old. So, just saying that the concept of 900 to 1,000 plus horsepower Indy cars, it is decades and decades and decades old. We have seen, in the early 2000s in particular, we saw some crazy numbers. We can also say that based on how IndyCar has done things in recent years, Conor, since it went back to turbos, they have used turbo boost pressure as a management device and have said, okay, if we're going to this track, we're going to knock boost down to here because this is where we want the speeds to be or to increase it. So I think the 900 to 1,000 horsepower number, which is awesome, I think we're talking more road and street courses, and at least for the tracks where safety concerns might be higher than others, I would assume those are the places where IndyCar will say, oh, okay, we're going to dial things back just a little bit. So,
because even now with the push to pass, that's a 50 horsepower-ish boost, right? That feels great. Like if you gave us 50 more horsepower from where we are right now, it's like, all right, this thing's moving. So, it'll just be, I think it'll be more entertaining for the fans to see us using more horsepower, and it'll be, hopefully the new engine regulations also provide, maybe the car shoots more flames or sounds better or something like that. I don't know. That'd be fun too.
Angrier engines, not a bad thing.
Yeah.
A couple of interesting ones here. I don't know if you want to weigh in on this, but I did a little bit in my cold open. This came in from Joseph Ostrowski, who says, "Hey, what's your opinion on Felipe Massa's comments suggesting that IndyCar lacks safety initiatives?" What do you think, Connor? Should Felipe put down the old Twitter machine, or did he have a point?
I think that's a situation that is such an arrogant European thing to say. It's like, who does this help, this statement? Like, there, not one racing series at the top level, whether it's NASCAR, Formula One, or IndyCar, no one, even NHRA, whatever, no one is not caring about safety. Like, is that a joke? You know what I mean? Like, come on. Like, there's people that get paid. There are full-time staffs, both on our side of the world and their side of the world, who are trying to improve safety. And so the fact that he would even say that is, like, supremely offensive. But it is so much, it's so predictable, because I heard stuff like that all the time when I was in Europe. And I was like, why do you guys say these things? Like, you just don't sound awesome when you say it. You know what I mean? Like, why? Like, that doesn't help a single person, not anyone. All it does is cause an argument. All it does is make everyone upset at someone and trying to prove a point to someone else. It's like, no, we get it. You guys have a halo. Fantastic. We get it. We don't think that that's the right way, but we're also developing something at a very high level also. And we don't have $500 million, maybe even $1 billion coming from the FIA to do stuff. You know what I mean? So it's just, it is very frustrating to me, if you can't tell.
I picked up on that slightly. The only, well, I shouldn't say the only thing. What just struck me odd with it is it was just total Captain Obvious type statements, right? There was nothing. Yeah. There was nothing added in there like, okay, well, I hadn't thought about that, or here's a new perspective. It's just, okay, let me say anything. Let me say things that anybody could say, and okay, well, all right, thanks, Felipe. Next question. So next one is, I think this might end up being one of the candidates for question of the week. And it doesn't ask about dollars, just methodology. This comes in from Chuck Knob, who says, what are the differences in how drivers are paid? Is it weekly? Weekly during the season only? Is it a percentage of the purse at the end of the season? Just curious about some of the different ways that drivers get paid by teams. Not necessarily how much they're getting paid, but the semantics of it. So what are some of the ways, without naming teams and dollar amounts, but how, you've been a full-time guy, you've been a part-time guy. What are some of the ways that money makes it to your bank account?
I'm still trying to figure out that way to get money to my bank account. I think honestly, in racing, you make money however you can. Realistically, you'd love to be a full-time, paid employee, which is, which I have been before, when I was with a certain team last year. I was paid monthly a salary, which is like, wow, this is nice. This is something new. But at Coin, I was not on a salary, but I had an opportunity to make prize money. However, everyone has to remember that the Indy 500 prize money is not real. So that is something that I continue to try and tell people, because every day we go, oh, well, you made like $300,000 at the Indy 500 this year. I was like, absolutely not. Like, not one of us see $1 of that unless you're finishing really in the top 15. And then it's even a less amount than that. So you try to make money however you can. The professionals like Scott Dixon, Ryan Hunter-Reay, Alexander Rossi, the guys who we obviously assume are making money. I don't know how anyone's contracts works. I assume I assume they get paid monthly. Maybe they get paid weekend by weekend. I don't know, but it just depends. And a lot of drivers' incomes, I would say, comes more so from doing, personal sponsorship deals, whether that's on your helmet, whether that's on your suit sleeves. That's why you see, logos stacking up on helmets, because that's sort of the driver's available real estate to maybe, get some, bring in some more, income.
I love it. A couple more here on Facebook, then we'll take one or two on Twitter and let you on to the rest of your day. Shay Small asks, for Conor, what are your thoughts on Hinch's impression of your dad? And how have you not punched him, by the way?
I think Hinch does a great job. Hinch can impersonate a lot of people, and the thing that he really does well, though, is he commits to it. So once he commits to it, then he's in. It's all about commitment when you're trying to impersonate someone or do a dance move like James does, and I think he does a good job.
If only we could get Hinch to commit to doing an impression of a professional race car driver. Ooh, shots fired. Sorry, couldn't resist. All kidding aside, let's see. Kevin Frederico, if you could race your dad one-on-one, what type of cars and what would you use to do so? Who would win? So what kind of racing and what kind of cars would you take on Double D?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I've never really seen my dad in a racing type of scenario because he obviously retired before I was born. But we grew up in such a different era, right? The cars were so different back then. I wouldn't trust one of those cars that he drove back in the day. Basically just like tin cans of nitromethane that were going to go up like a nuclear missile. So let's just go at it in rental cars at the airport and see what happens.
I was going to say one of the old Nissan GTP cars with that great photo of you as a little guy standing up in the cockpit. So that might be one. Norm Nelson, you've sent this in once or twice, and I apologize it's taken me this long to get to answering it. Norm says, how are the tires in IndyCar handled? Does each team own its own wheels, and they bring them to a Firestone booth where the tires are mounted at balance, ? Yes, teams own their own wheels. They drop off those wheels. Firestone's mounting technicians do exactly that, mount them, balance them, and hand them back. And that is the fairly standard practice. Yeah, and the tires, like engines, are leased on an annual basis. So, although the teams consume those tires, they actually all belong to Firestone and go back to Firestone after they have been used. There's really only one exception, which we've all seen, and they're some of the funniest looking tires, and those are either setup tires or loading tires, and these are some of the oldest, most faded, worn out things imaginable. But those are just items that are so dead and so beyond use. If anyone wanted to cut one open and try and figure out Firestone's magic, or if it's another brand, their magic, usually there's one, maybe two sets that get left with the team, but they're just ancient technology by then. All right, let's grab one or a couple here on Twitter and then let you on to the rest of your day, my man. Let's see. We got a lot of good questions here, too. Good old @CarMcFast1. That's a great Twitter handle. How is it practicing in an Xfinity car in the rain? So, first time in the car and rain and Road America. You're a sick pup, you don't want to do that. But again, you mentioned that, of course, you're going to take advantage of it. But what was it like?
I was begging them to go out.
Did they think you were strange for asking?
Yeah, they were like, oh, what are you talking about? I get it. Teams don't want to have the chance of going off or doing whatever, but it was fun. It was realistically, we only did, ins and outs of pit lane to get used to the pit speed limit and the fact that there is no pit speed limiter. The cars are definitely loose cannons in the wet, and it was fun. I'd be curious to race one at some point.
let's see, where else should we go here? This comes in from Tim Calabro, who's just always bringing the comedy. He says, for our man Daly, do we need to prepare for any other surprises? He was wondering, maybe are there any statements we might go back to made by your grandparents, great-grandparents? Are there any statements from the 1800s we might need to prepare for that could affect your future racing? All kidding aside, has this left you, I don't know if gun-shy is, maybe that's a little harshly worded, but has this raised your sensitivity to, oh man, do I just need to be careful about every single thing now because it might adversely affect me? Or have you said, you know what, no, I'm not going to let that change how I live my life and be concerned about some people might think something and want to take it away from me?
Well, I have to be careful. I have to be careful what I say, but I think it has made me very sensitive just about walking around. It's made me feel really awkward. It's just an odd, this is getting into the more of the the personal side of how this whole situation affected both me and my family. But it's just something it's an unnecessary position to have been put in. And yeah, it is weird. Am I gonna watch what I say? I always do. I always have. I've always been sort of edgy, but I know my limits. I know I've been brought up in a home where I know what's right to say and I know what's wrong to say. And I know, I am very familiar with how things work on the internet. I see stuff that blows up and I see stuff that doesn't. So I know what to avoid. I think there's, I will never change my personality. That's for sure. But, I certainly do think about things from a different perspective now, which is, it's, I don't want to say it's a shame that I have to think about it like that now, but it's different.
Let's see, a couple more here. Nice comment from David Cody. He said, for Conor, no question, just thank you for your classy response in the face of injustice. Best wishes to you and hope to see you back in IndyCar full-time. Lance Snyder, someone else who kindly sends in a number of questions. He said this one is for Conor. He's asked, did the dramas taking place around you last weekend make it harder to concentrate on your job? And he also asked if you could compare the feeling of power and acceleration between the stock car and an Indy car, and which one really grabs your attention most when you're going flat out.
I'd say to the first part of that question, to be honest, in my career, let's think about all the crazy situations that I've been in, whether it's jumping in on a Saturday morning for my first ever road course race. There's been, whether it's jumping in Toronto into something totally new again. I've been in situations before. I've started the Rolex 24 hours at Le Mans after doing one, not Le Mans, Daytona, after doing, one lap and just getting out there and driving through the night at 4 a.m. and it was 30 degrees and you couldn't feel anything. There's a lot of situations drivers encounter that, no one is really prepared for. And this one was obviously very unique, but in the end, there's still a job to do, right? You still go out there and everything else goes out the window when you're driving. And that's what I like about racing as well. So, no matter what's going on, I still haven't found a situation that, really would affect my driving, purely because I know when the visor goes down, what's about to happen and what I need to do. Although it's much nicer when you don't have to deal with crazy situations, I will say. And when it comes to power, the NASCAR, it doesn't feel like it's very powerful under acceleration because I think it's very heavy. But once you get going, once you're in fourth gear and you're hauling down the straight, you are moving. You're definitely, the horsepower is quite high. So you're definitely hauling the mail when you're getting down, into the brake zone for turn 1 and turn 5 at Road America. And I think as well, the tires probably are more effective, when it comes to this. But you definitely get wheel spin after about 2 laps of tire wear, and you're in the carousel. The carousel's second gear compared to an IndyCar, which is 4th, 5th gear. But you're sliding through there. It's sort of on the limit. You're trying to get on the power, and your wheel spinning all the way out. It's still, it's just a different style for sure.
All right, couple here to close, and we are definitely blessed this week, Conor, with a lot of folks. And I know I told folks we had about half an hour, and as you probably can tell, I'm bad at keeping time, so thank you for overtime here, but we've got a bunch of great questions. Jonathan Grabowski says, in honor of the Darlington Throwback Weekend, what retro paint scheme would you like to run? And I guess that's maybe IndyCar or any series.
Well, I think the whole throwback thing is genius. I don't know why. I know why we can't do it in IndyCar, because it's, cost for painting a car or wrapping a car. But I think it's genius. I think we should have a weekend like that in IndyCar. But throwback for me, NASCAR-wise, Kyle Petty Hot Wheels scheme back in the day was beautiful. Or any of the Cartoon Network cars I thought were very cool. I like that. There's a lot of old school NASCAR looks that could look really cool on current NASCARs, but there are a lot of really cool IndyCar schemes that could look really cool on current IndyCars.
Yeah.
I would love to see that happen, maybe in an era where somehow we have a lot of money again to just throw around, but I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Well, I don't know if Rain or Garage Doors still exists as a business, but if so, they would need to. Okay, well, they would need to sponsor you.
We've tried to hit them up already. Don't worry.
Okay. Well, if we do have
Candy and all that stuff, Candy Tyrrell or whatever that was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you have some good options there. All right, last question or two. This one comes in from Shyam Cherupala. He says, Marshall, why can't IndyCar display the order of cars on TV during a race like F1 broadcasts? They show we can see the order of all the drivers all the time, and it changes as the driver order changes. He says it's distracting to keep looking for your favorite order, your favorite driver, with the scrolling driver order on top of the screen. I can't disagree with you there, and have gotten this question more than once. I think for folks who've watched F1 style, and it's not just their style, I mean, we've had American broadcasters who have done similar things, but having the entire list on the left side of the screen from top to bottom compared to it scrolling across from left to right on the top. I've been told it is not inexpensive to do that, but I don't know. I would love to see that evolution at some point in time, because whether it's commonplace in F1 or not, or folks might say, oh, you just took that from F1, I think if it looks better, then, that might not be something to ignore altogether. All right, well, let me get to our last question or two here, and I think I might go with just the final one, which of course I had sitting in front of me, and I lost, and now I am trying to find it, and this is part of the fun of being an idiot. Here we go. Final question for you, Mr. Daly. This comes in from Nick Leonard. Conor, now that you have done The Amazing Race, presumably you have a good idea of what it takes to succeed. He said, if you had to build a team of 2 current or recent IndyCar drivers for The Amazing Race, who would make the best team? And what 2 would be an unmitigated disaster, and why? Thank you, Nick. This is a great one.
I think, honestly, anyone like Hinch would be really good at it, I think. Hinch obviously has no boundaries in what he will do. We've seen him dance. We've seen him make hilarious internet videos. I would like to do it with Hinch. I think that would be really good. I think we would be really good.
Fast on his feet too, right? Very quick thinker.
Yeah. But I think Alex and I were pretty good. We almost won, but
yeah.
we didn't quite get there. But people who definitely wouldn't be good together, I think that would be funnier to talk about.
I've got one immediately that comes to mind, but who are the 2 unmitigated disasters?
I think Ryan Hunter-Reay would probably not be able to do it.
Why is that? What attributes is he lacking?
Well, Ryan is very forthright in his thought process. I think he's very, he's very confident in what he does, very much like Alex. But I guess I don't know enough about Ryan's background on, intelligence or anything like that. But I feel like, there could be some arguments at times, because I have found myself at times wanting to argue with Ryan Hunter-Reay about things that happen on track. You know what I mean? So in the end, we're all still very close. I think you could almost pair any people that we already know hate each other in the IndyCar paddock against each other for a reality show, and it wouldn't go well.
Okay, so that's one. You got Hunter-Reay. Who's the other one? Come on, man, because I got two. I've got two that I think would be the perfect lineup, but I don't want to possibly take one off your board.
The perfect lineup, the perfect disaster.
To me, the perfect lineup is boring. The real perfect one is the unmitigated disaster lineup. So you've got Hunter-Reay as one. Who's the other catastrophe?
Like Joseph and Hinch would be perfect, I think, as well. But I think the other disaster would probably be Tony Kanaan and anyone else.
And what is it about TK that you think is a mismatch for the Amazing Race?
Well, he's a fiery individual.
Okay.
Sure,
okay.
And I don't know. I just think that it would actually be complete hilarity to see him working with either Marco or Ryan or like TK and Will Power seem like a very odd duo, right? So that would be something that I would like to see.
So now we're on to one of my picks. The first, I think, the absolute best choice for worst candidate would be Power. Because you'd be standing there and get whatever your instructions were for the thing. He would look up, see a butterfly, and just wander off following it. And he'd be gone off the show because he's the most easily distracted human being. So he would genuinely just be sitting next to a park watching butterflies, and the film crew not even aware of where he happens to be. I think the other disaster in a similar but maybe the opposite direction, Zachary Clayman DeMello. I think he would spend the entire time on his phone. And so while Power is looking to the sky, I think he would sneak some sort of smartphone somewhere. And so you'd have Power wandering, just staring up, and you'd have Clayman DeMello just staring down the whole time, and nothing would get done. It'd be hilarious to watch. I don't know for how long, but yeah, I see all kinds of failure there. And I think Graham would be interesting because I think you put him and Hunter-Reay together, you talk about two forthright guys with strong opinions.
There would be some people would hate each other real quick, I think.
The censor would be getting...
What that show is like. It makes you want to hate everything.
Oh, yeah. They'd be getting carpal tunnel from pressing the little censor button, bleeping those two guys going at it. So that would be fun. Well, hopefully we entertained you for a little bit here. And thanks again, Conor, for coming on. I know it would have been... How's this? It would have been really easy to say, yeah, no thanks. I don't want to talk about anything. But I appreciate the fact that you realize folks do care. And we're going to put you in, hopefully, any kind of bad situations here. So thanks for taking some time, my man, to come on and just share a little bit about one of the wilder weeks in your career.
No problem at all, man. Anytime.
PNC is proud to sponsor Scott Dixon, driver of the number 9 car for Chip Ganassi Racing. Scott knows that the road to victory lane starts today. Copyright 2018, the PNC Financial Services Group Incorporated. All rights reserved. PNC Bank, National Association, member FDIC. Zach Veatch, you were quick like a bunny Saturday night at Gateway. You also did some phenomenal work in testing beforehand at Pocono, which your teammates heaped plenty of praise on you. Give me some thoughts on the winding down stage of your rookie season, because it seems like from the outside, things are going in a very, very right direction for you with 4 consecutive top 10s.
Yeah, no, so far it's been a really fun past month and a half. Just seems like a lot of things kind of just went the right way, that the switch kind of finally flipped, and, honestly, it just come down to being more confident inside the race car. It just got a lot easier, and, I think we were kind of flickering on and off through Texas and Iowa, Road America and qualifying. We were close, but just kept making little mistakes, or things didn't come through the way we needed them to, and just seemed like Toronto, the big key there was patience. Mid-Ohio, patience. Pocono, definitely a lot of patience. And for Gateway, it was just the right level of aggression and patience as well. And I think if we would have been able to actually qualify, we should have started up towards the front, and, maybe we would have had a lot more of a shot to be kind of up there with Alex and Scott at the end.
So, this is a topic we've covered more than a few times, and I'm not bringing it up just for the sake of boring you to death with it. But tell us about the arc from a physical standpoint. You've been doing your best to become Mini Hulk, Tony Kanaan 2.0. Are you at a place now, do you feel, Zach, towards the end of this season, where you can go to a Mid-Ohio, a Portland, a wherever, and the physical side is not something you really have to think about? Because not every rookie is able to say that, regardless of size.
Yeah, no, I think it's getting a lot easier, and I think that being out of the car for a year was the biggest killer, because it's kind of taken until now. It doesn't really matter how much you train or how heavy weights you can lift. It takes a little bit to get race fit. And I felt like, right around Toronto, Mid-Ohio, I just felt race fit. And it's funny because my engineer is noticing the difference as well, because we were sitting inside the trailer, I think at Pocono or Gateway, and they have a channel that logs the steering torque so they can see, how heavy the wheel is through the corner. And, he was asking me, is this weight going to be okay for the entire race? And I'm like, yeah, man, it's not even a question. Why? He goes, if we tried to run this weight, the first month that you were in this car, you would do 5 laps and you'd be in here saying that there's no way you're going to be able to, do 30 laps with the steering weight. So it's cool to see that transition. But I definitely, this winter, I have a full thing. I want to be a lot stronger than I am now, because, every little bit helps, especially with these animals. I mean, no power steering. It does get tiring no matter how good of, condition that you're in, but it's just managing that fatigue, I think. And relaxing's been a big part of it. Just, I feel relaxed in the car now, and that just allows you just to last a lot longer.
One of the things that we saw from the in-car on Saturday night at Gateway is, well, I like that idea of relaxing in the car, Zach, but those are some fast hands, having to do some very rapid micro and even major corrections on the steering wheel. Tell us about that. Most of us in life have not had to counter steer at 180 whatever miles an hour with walls coming at me, but you seem to be doing that with particular skill and adept manner there.
Well, to be completely honest, at that point, I think, I was racing for a top 5, and, at that point, I thought I was racing for a podium, so I had Alex right in front of me, and I wasn't going to let them pull away, so I got a little too aggressive and nipped the curb, and that kind of broke the rear loose, but, I caught the car, and, it wasn't a big deal. I was just like, okay, gotta calm down, don't do that again, and I went about my day. It wasn't until riding back to the hotel, I was on my phone, and someone tagged me in the video, and I literally did not know my hands could move that fast, to be honest. It didn't seem that crazy in the car, but when I watched the video, I was like, whoa! I thought I was looking at, a different car, a different driver, but it was really cool to see it. I think if they were any slower, I wouldn't have finished the race, that's for sure.
Wow. Well, let's get in. Let me ask one more question before we get into listener questions. That's the new format we've been adopting lately, Zach, which is primarily just going straight to listener questions. Do have one item which, as I mentioned in my my little cold open here, that is sad for me to think that when we are done with Portland this weekend, we will no longer have Mazda as the sponsor of the Road to Indy. This is their farewell to the North American open wheel ladder system and their place atop it, and having supported so many drivers. Would you share some thoughts with us as someone who spent a decent amount of time there on that ladder and with Mazda as a benefactor?
Yeah, of course. First and foremost, I just want to thank John Doonan and everyone at Mazda for what they did, not only for my career, but for, hundreds of others. I was one of the lucky ones that got to take part of the very first year of the Road to Indy and USF 2000 back in 2010. So I've gotten to see kind of this modest ladder system from the very start to 8 years later, where we find ourselves now. And there's so many drivers that have gotten their opportunities to race in IndyCar because of them, like myself, like Spencer, like Gabby, like Sage. And if it wasn't for that ladder system, I don't think any of us would have had, it's not an easy road to get there to begin with, but we wouldn't have had as a smooth of ascent to IndyCar, if we want to say that. So I know the future of the ladder system is probably going to be in good hands. I know a lot of people respect what Mazda's done, and they would want to hopefully be a part of that in the future. But for Mazda, I just, thank you, because they believed in all of us little guys when we weren't, anything but just some kids trying to make our dream of becoming IndyCar drivers a reality.
Well, let's jump into some questions here, and some of them are fun, a little bit cheeky. Let's start with a cheeky one. This coming from Jeremy Ghosh. He says, Zach, are you currently the best active IndyCar driver from Ohio? Sorry, Graham.
Oh, man.
Shots fired already.
I'd say I'd look at the championship. There's still quite a void for me to catch Graham, but hopefully next year him and I can have a tighter race with each other, and we could revisit that question. But, I have a ton of respect for Graham. For us to be two guys from Ohio, hopefully doing well each weekend, I think, OH is in good hands.
We got one here from Flash Jordan, who says, does Zach have any interest in sports cars or any other series? And he also said, do you have any preferred music?
Oh, yeah. Other series, yeah. I mean, of course, IndyCar is my love and what I want to do full-time for, the rest of my career, if that's a possibility. But I definitely would love to do some endurance racing, Daytona 24 Hours, the Sebring 12. I think that would be a lot of fun. And I keep saying this, but a wing sprint car, just do a few races on dirt. That'd be really cool. I think that'd be a conversation I'd have to have with Michael and my sponsor first. But that's on my list of something to do. And music, yeah, big Beatles fan, of course. And lately I've been listening to a lot of Drake. So things have been going well, so I got to keep that up, I guess.
Oh, you're killing me here.
Sorry,
but that's all right. No, me and Power, apparently we have some work to do in introducing you to folks who maybe inspired Drake, or inspired those who inspired Drake. But we got a project. What about the sports car side? I mean, you were, when IndyCar wasn't exactly panning out the way you hoped, I know that you squeaked in a little bit of IMSA. Is adding in IMSA on a more regular basis a goal at all for you?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think, it just depends how things pan out. I didn't want to put too much on my plate this year. Just, I wanted to focus on IndyCar and get competitive in IndyCar and consistent first. And, if things keep going the way that they're going, I think, those would be a lot more easier to look at, if we want to say that. But, yeah, I got to do the PC class with, some good people, and I think I would love to go back and try something like that. But, I want to start winning IndyCar races and things before I get too distracted with other series.
Smart man. But being part of the Honda family, though, I think you can go ahead and put in your request with Roger Penske to drive one of the Acura DPIs at Daytona in January.
Yeah,
so,
I'd love to. That would be great. I get to see that Graham gets to do that, and there's no hard feelings once we get back to IndyCar, so hopefully they branch out a little.
Well, but, I like the idea of you in one car, Graham in the other, and we could have a yet again, the Ohio battle, really see who's throwing down.
That'd be perfect.
David Hinshaw says, becoming more of a Zach Veatch fan week by week. Well, we won't hold that against you, David. He says, Zach, what has been the biggest surprise of the season for you? And is knowing you have a multi-year deal helped the move up from IndyCars to Indy Lights? He says, thanks so much and good luck.
Yeah, well, first, thank you. I really appreciate that. More people we can convert over to Zach Veatch fans is a good thing. And honestly, the biggest thing that's been a surprise is just how you feel like you're on, you might be like a little bit down on speed, and then you show up the next day, and then the speed's already there, and you're kind of like, wow, what really changed? And honestly, it's just your comfort level, how you kind of comprehend the car, how the speed slows down mentally, and then it begins just to feel a little easier, and that's the main thing. It's the car's just starting to feel a lot slower, a lot smaller, and that's made it a lot easier to kind of be more consistent and understand what you're doing that affects the car itself. So that's been the biggest surprise, is just how growth and development happens, because it's not a steady climb upwards. It's, you make a jump, and then you plateau for a little bit, then you make a jump and plateau. So we definitely just made our other jump, so hopefully we can keep that going.
Next one is from Jay Coop. He says, Zach, is there any truth to the rumor that Andretti Autosport and their associated teams will field 33 cars in the 103rd Indianapolis 500? Come on, man, we need some breaking news here.
I think that might be a bit of a far stretch. That seems to be...
but not far off.
Well, I mean, more cars, more chances to win the Indy 500, I guess. So,
see,
I'm not confirming anything. But
okay.
We'll see.
Well, Andrew here has a similar question, but for our other guest this week. He says, for Zach, with Andretti potentially running half of the field next year, Andretti McLaren, Andretti Harding, Andretti Mick Harding, what's the best sales pitch for Conor to use on Michael to secure a full-time ride?
I'm not sure. I think, find a local Indiana business. I got very lucky there with Group 1001, and, you find a business that's proud of IndyCar, proud of Indiana, and I think the pitch gets a lot easier at that point, because we all know nowadays it's tough. It takes sponsor dollars to get in the car and prove yourself.
Let's see. Here's one that it's a little more general, and we can both answer this if desired. This comes in from Damien on Twitter. He says, with the recent crashes involving Robert Wickens, Ryan Hunter-Reay, and Charles Leclerc, do you think IndyCar would be more inclined to adopt the halo, as ugly as it is? Now, this is something we didn't... I know this is a bit of an emotional and or touchy subject for you and some others. The Robert crash, I believe, was really the first big one in IndyCar, Zach, that you weren't caught up in so much, but you weren't that far behind. I know, having witnessed it, then pulling in under the red flag and having to stop and process all of that. What was that like for you, just as a human being, and also as an athlete, having to onboard what happened and make sense out of it, then decide to go back to racing? And we'll get to Damien's halo question right after that.
Yeah, it was definitely a first. I haven't really seen a big incident in IndyCar, let alone had to kind of drive through one. So seeing that kind of firsthand, it's you see it kind of like stop motion pictures. It seems like everyone kind of jokes about, it freezes for a moment and you process it and then it speeds up. But that's honestly kind of how it felt. And, as I drove through the corner and saw the incident, the first thing I said on the radio was, are they okay? Because, it seemed like a big incident. And, the red flag definitely helps you process. You stop, you get out of the car, and you think about it. But, I always have heard drivers, especially, the IndyCar guys and Formula One drivers, that, getting back in the car is the one thing that, allows you to find some peace, and that's for sure. Once we all heard that, Robert was awake and on his way, to receive care, we all got back in the car, and it made it a lot easier because we all knew that he was okay, and, we got back to doing our jobs, and that makes it easier to kind of, get away from the mindset of that. But to get to the halo question, I think for the halo, no. I don't think we would see the halo at all in IndyCar. IndyCar's got a great program that they're working on with the aero screen. They're working on it as quickly as possible, but they want to make sure when it comes out there's no hidden flaws, and that's what we love about them. Is I hated to see Massa tweet what he did, because I really don't think he has an understanding of what IndyCar does, or how committed IndyCar is to safety, because they go through everything so meticulously to keep us safe and keep us doing what we love. And I think the aero screen is such a better solution than the halo. And once we get to a point where it's on all 33 cars, I think IndyCar will be obviously showing their dominance on that side.
Interesting though, and I see what's piquing Damien's curiosity here, based on not necessarily the crash last weekend at Spa that took place, where we saw the halo itself prove to be an invaluable safety device, but I know that looking at Ryan Hunter-Reay's in-car, looking back from the right side mirror, for example, and Robert going overhead, you drop Robert's car down a foot, and I'm not confident an aero screen would have the structural integrity to stop 1,700 pounds from leaving us with a much more troubling outcome. And this is, I'm not trying to pick apart IndyCar by any means. I'm not siding with Massa. I just know that I think most people with functioning eyesight look at the halo and say, good Lord, what is that? Then when you have something like this happen at Spa, you go, got it. Doesn't matter what my eyeballs are leading my brain to think in terms of aesthetics. We can see that this did exactly what was needed. I know we're talking two different devices, one being more of a deflecting device than take a giant impact structural piece of the car like the halo is. Two different topics, two different items, two different design philosophies, both with positives and potential negatives. Massa being the one commenting about it. He, of course, having been hit and knocked out by a small spring coming off of a car, would possibly be able to go right through that halo and hit him again. Would that be possible with the aero screen? Very unlikely it would pierce the aero screen based on what we've seen from its thickness and such, but is that same aero screen capable of stopping a car from breaking it or flattening it, and a car or something heavy from a car getting to a driver's helmet? Again, these are things we will find out. Obviously, we don't want to find out live in a race, but we'll hopefully find out as testing data, isolated testing data is provided. But I don't know if there is a perfect solution. I just know that picking sides, which appears to be what Massa did, seems dumb. So,
right, at the end of the day, we're all just trying to make one sport that we love safer, and with IndyCar, with the aero screen, that's going to be something, especially now that we have the data, and we saw what happened at Pocono. That's going to be a big part of their test plan of making sure that they can prevent the worst from happening if that kind of incident happened again. So I think we're going to know a lot more sooner rather than later from IndyCar as the aero screen develops. But yeah, even from my point of view, is with the aero screen, you always get asked, would you want the aero screen or not? And you think from your friend's perspective and keeping everyone safe, you say yes, but as a driver, I've always liked, historically 90s IndyCar racing, and it's just having your head out there. It just looks, to me, that's what IndyCar racing was. But you see Pocono firsthand, and you come in, and first thing you're thinking is, wow, an aero screen doesn't look so bad right now, with the amount of debris that was flying through the air. So I think that's one of the things that we have to for sure keep advancing on, because, racing's never going to be 110% safe, but I think that we can improve there, and I'm definitely all for that, to see my friends not get hurt, or myself for any matter, because I hope to be doing this for the next 20 years, so there's probably going to be a lot more incidents that I'm not as lucky in, and I think the aero screen will definitely help in that sense.
Amen. Henry Erbach asks, Zach, how pleased are your parents with your work? That's a great question, Henry. Or do your does your dad, when you pull in his Raj, be like, come on, man, you know you could have gotten that guy in turn 3. What the heck's going on?
No, I think it's funny, my mom, she's a nurse, so any race that I, finish, she's very happy about. Doesn't matter what place, she's just happy that, the car's off for another week before she has to worry again. But my dad, yeah, it's funny, it's never like that. He's never, been the one, oh, man, you could have got him or anything. It's just, he's so happy that this journey has gotten us to IndyCar, and, it's so cool seeing him, especially after Pocono, after Gateway. In Indy Lights, you wouldn't celebrate a 5th place finish, but in IndyCar, it's a little different story. So, just to get that hug from him after the race and see, how excited and happy he is, it's pretty cool because, this journey's been, for me, for sure, but, he's always been there so supportive, and, he's seen the good times and the bad times. So, honestly, it's like he's in the car with me. So, it's really cool to share some success with him.
I love your dad, and the cool thing is, and this is probably just a universal thing, so maybe I'm just dumb, but there's just a lot of cool parents in IndyCar, whether it's Hinch's dad, who he refers to as Jer Bear, good old Jeremy, and just on down the line. There's so many, it's just cool to see the family aspect as well, and I can't say that in every series I actually get to see those same parents, or Spencer's parents, you name it. There's a lot of cool family connections here. Tom Blackburn, interesting question for you. Says, here's the question. What has Zach learned or taken from each individual teammate that has helped you this season? He says each driver has different traits, etc. So I'm curious what each one has taught him. So, all right, and I guess if we really want to extend this, we can go to the 500 where you had Mr. 9'12" Stephen Wilson, and also our boy Carlos Munoz, as AJ Foyt refers to him. But what comes to mind across all your different teammates about things you might have picked up from them, whether it's professionally or, I don't know, outside the car?
Yeah, for sure. I'll start with the 500 group and work way backwards. Munoz, how to ride a curbing and not crash. I've never seen someone run so low on any of the ovals. And I guess I've picked up that trait because I was talking with Alex, and he's like, you're the hardest guy to follow because, you may be even lower than Munoz at times, and it's so frustrating. And I'm like, well, that's good. That's good to know. Steph, he taught me, basically, he's so happy all the time just to, be doing what he loves. And, no matter how the weekend was going, he was able to take that kind of step back and, appreciate the moment and keep positive about things. And, not that I am negative, but, just seeing it from his perspective is awesome. And he's taught me how to run a reef tank, so I have to thank him for that.
Wow.
Rossi, for sure, is, pure aggression. That guy, how he tackles a break zone is awe-inspiring, and that's something I've been learning, every single weekend. Ryan's just complete, how he has the ability to see the last 20 laps when you're on lap 5. The whole race kind of paints out in his head. He's very methodical about that, so, that's been a great learning tool. And with Marco, honestly, it's just been learning a lot about the car and, how he kind of sets up the car. And especially at Indianapolis and the super speedways, I've learned a ton about oval racing with Marco. So every single one of them, if I can take a piece from everyone and do what everyone's good at in my own way, that's how you become a complete driver. So that's why I've been so excited about this team. And it's just fun. That's something I said at Gateways. At the end of the day, the 3 of us, or 4 of us, I should say, we're just having fun. It's fun in the engineering room. It's fun making our cars fast, and it's fun going out and racing with everyone else. So I think that's what's just making this so good is, we have the ability just to have fun when we're supposed to and be serious when we need to be.
A couple more here for you, Zach, and maybe we'll add to that question that we got from Tom. It's not as if every season in your young career, Zach, has gone according to plan. So you've experienced adversity, had to do your best to learn coping mechanisms for that. What's it been like in an Andretti environment with Ryan Hunter-Reay? knowing that while he is still in a very competitive place in the championship, if there's a car for the cartoon anvil to strike, it seems like it is his within your team. I'm guessing you're witnessing, but maybe also learning from Ryan about how to process the, oh man, again, yet having to get back up and not let that drag down your motivation or your mental approach. Has that been an area you've been able to learn from, even just observing or first person?
Yeah. Ryan's a guy that can win any race that he's a part of. I have so much, admiration for him. And, he's proven himself the championship and Indy 500 win. And I think that goes a long way when something like that happens because, it's something that you can't control. And that's a big thing that I've even learned from my engineer, and especially IndyCar racing, because I feel there's a ton more in IndyCar than there was ever in Indy Lights or Mazda that you can't control. So at the end of the day, whether it's, a red flag coming out and running your lap that was going to put you in the fast six, or, a mechanical failure, which is very rare for us, if it's one of those things that you really can't control, you can't be too upset or too hard on yourself about it because, you know the story. You knew if you were competitive or not. It just wasn't your day. And luckily, we get to go racing the next weekend. So it seems like Ryan, I feel very bad for the luck he's had the past couple weekends. But, he's the type of guy that with Pocono and Gateway, he could come out and win, Portland. So he's just focused on the next race. He doesn't look at the bad too much. And I think that's important. You got to always take away the positives, look at what you can learn from, and go on to the next weekend and do a better job.
Has he tried to convert you to be a turkitarian after watching those Butterball commercials, by the way? I love my Butterball stuff. I've been using more turkey and everything because I'm, learning how to cook. And, it's a really good product to cook with, so it's been good. You are a funny, funny man. All right, well, let's wind down here. I'll grab one or two more questions, and I know we need to let you get about your business and start heading out this way to the West Coast. You are also we had a couple folks ask this question, so I'll kind of glom it all into one. But you were the first person to test an IndyCar at Portland, I believe, on the modern, slightly evolved track, plus with the DW12. Any thoughts on what folks might see in terms of racing? There's sections of the track that you're like, hey, if you're there, go out and watch here, because this really might be fun.
Yeah. First, I'm so excited to get to Portland because it's just got that old school feel to it. It's just, there's something about those tracks like Watkins Glen, like Road America, that you're just there and you feel nostalgic about it. And Portland has that. And to drive it, it's so fast. It's so committed. And I think that's what the fans are really going to love is, to be fast around that place, you're going to put a lap in and you're going to come into pit lane and you're going to be like, I don't really want to do that again. So for me, if I was going as a fan, I would definitely watch the last four corners. I think it's turn 10, 11, 12. So it's a really fast chicane at the end of the really long back straight. And with reds on in qualifying, it damn near might be flat. So I think, you're going to see some heroic effort to get through there to get in the fast six. So that's where I would be watching if I wasn't driving this weekend, that's for sure.
Eric Harkrader, who won, or provided he responds, gets a T-shirt for asking my favorite question last week, has sent in another good one. It says, Zach, can you tell us a funny story about someone who assumed you were younger than you are? And he says, for example, in my 20s, I still had to show my ID to see a PG-13 movie on a first date. So I know Eric's onto something here. Give us a good one.
Well, I'm laughing so hard because that same exact scenario happened to be on a first date. So that one was embarrassing, but I was only 19 then. So
would you remember what movie?
I'm trying to think. I think it was the one with Adam Sandler where That's My Boy, where he's got the big back tattoo when he was a baby. Yeah, it was that one. So recently, it always gets me, but, we were flying back from a test somewhere, and I was sitting in an exit row, and literally, she's like, you have to be 15 to sit here, and I'm like, I am. And she's like, can I see your ID to be sure? So, like, I gave her my ID, and I'm like, at this point, can I get a beer, too? Like, please? I mean, it was just one of those days. It's like, I got another 6 hours before I get home, and I've already been carded to sit in an exit row. I think this is a beer moment.
Oh, I love it. I love it. All right, I think we ventured down this road a little bit when you were on last time, but we'll go down it again from Daniel Ferris. He says, for the both of you, if you could have one superhero ability, what would it be and why? And who would you choose to be your sidekick?
Ooh, it's a good one. See, I like the idea of being able to pause time. Is that a superhero thing?
Yeah.
That's the question.
I would think it'd be to speed things up so you get ahead of everybody and win.
Yeah, true. But see, what my theory is, you can either speed things up, but it's not changing anything, right? So if you're running around the track and you speed things up, it's going to be the same lap time when you get back around. But if you pause time for half a second and then you turn it back on, by the time you get back to the start-finish line, you're going to be half a second forward in time.
Okay, I was thinking you would stop time, jump out of your car, run to all the other cars, turn off the ignition switches, run back, get in yours, and then start time again. Everyone's car would be sputtering and stopping while you would go on to win the race.
See, exactly. I mean, there's so many possibilities if you can control time, but we'll throw that one aside. If we can, an actual superhero, I'd say I just watched Deadpool last night, and Deadpool 2, and that's like my favorite superhero. So, I mean, probably the ability, to be like Deadpool and just, be like basically shot 1,000 times and not die. That would be cool. And sidekick, just because it'd be funny to think him as my sidekick, because I think the roles are kind of reversed right now, it'd probably be Rossi. I'd make him my sidekick.
Oh, but Batman had his Robin. What would his name be, right? Because it couldn't be Mr. Super Awesome, because your sidekick can't have a bigger persona than you. What kind of name, what kind of superhero name would you give Rossi, but that fit that second tier status?
Ross. It doesn't sound like a superhero name.
Just Ross. Hey,
just Ross.
I like that. You with a big cape and Ross. Yeah.
I apologize if anyone named Ross is listening to this. I do like the name.
You've just offended an entire type of person. Let's see. As for me, it'd probably be flight. I just look. I've had so many dreams where I'm flying, and then I wake up and I'm mad because I'm not dreaming that I'm flying. That I'd want to do that. I don't know if I'd do anything useful with it, but just the ability to fly, I think, would be the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, that would be one. And then on the topic of dreams, have you ever been able to like lucid dream where you control your dream? That's a cool thing.
A little.
That's not really a superhero, but like when you get to do that, you feel kind of like a superhero.
A little bit, but it's weird. I rarely remember my dreams.
No, I'm not like that. I write down dreams if they're really good.
You've got a little dream book next to your bed?
I do.
Oh my goodness, the things we didn't know we were going to learn today, Zach Veatch. As for a sidekick, I'm struggling here. I might need some suggestions on who should be my sidekick, and I'd feel sad for them.
You can have Miller.
Oh, yeah. I mean that's already a pitiful situation there. My sidekick would probably be a cat. I mean, that would be cool. It just me, a flying superhero, carrying a basket with a cat. Now, that would be the silliest thing, I think, of all time.
I've been seeing all the awesome, Marshall Pruitt stickers and, the Wiccan stickers and the Hinch sticker. The animation, someone out there listening to this needs to make a flying Marshall Pruitt with a cat in a basket.
See,
that's what I'm asking for.
If that isn't a T-shirt by Sonoma, we as a species have failed.
If that becomes the sticker, it will be on my helmet for Sonoma.
You don't know what kind of bad decision you just unleashed, but I look forward to posing for that photo. All right, let's get down to one or two more here. Adam Smith, thank you for always sending in some fun stuff here. He says, Zach, I saw on your NBCSN cooking segment this week, or saw you on that, and it looks like we have the same refrigerator. He says, do you have problems with the ice maker and water filter as well? He says that piece of bleep doesn't hardly make ice! Exclamation point. Best of luck to you the rest of the way. So we're getting refrigerator questions here. Zach?
I'm going to go ahead and just assume we have the same refrigerator, because no matter if you click on cubed or crushed ice, you only get crushed ice. So that's problem number one. So if that's what you have, I guarantee you we have the same refrigerator. I have no idea how to fix it, but I've just settled with crushed ice for the rest of my drinks.
And we actually had a number of folks ask about your cooking segment as well. I didn't get a chance to see it since I was in Monterey, but what did you make? Was it good?
Yeah, it was good. It was we called them street course tacos, but they were turkey tacos with kind of like this spicy honey sauce on it. And yeah, I loved them. Anders, he absolutely loved them, so that was good.
Wow.
I'm going to actually make them again because we made them for the show. That was an awesome dinner, and after having them at the track, I was like, man, I really need to do that again.
Well, we need to introduce Anders to more things, so I think you're on the right path here. I like the sound of that. All right, Brent Hart, we'll go with two more questions. Brent Hart says, for Zach, has Alex bought you dinner yet? If not, he should. He owes you for your excellent testing at Pocono. Does Rossi come out of pocket? Is he that kind of guy? Does he treat his teammates?
The reason I'm laughing is because literally this evening we're going and getting dinner, and he's buying me dinner for Pocono. So that's an awesome question. Maybe this guy has superpowers. He can see into the future.
See, Brent, you're just toying with us. You've dipped in from the future to ask a question. All right. Well, let's use our last question for you from Kristen Bruce. She's got a couple here. It says, for Zach, do you have an explanation for the consistency and momentum you've had these past few races? Have you changed anything in your routine as a driver, or is it 26 car guys done anything different? Is it data? What is explaining this consistency?
For me, it's just been kind of looking at the race in a little bit of a different way. It's I basically said the last half of the season I want to consistently be in the top 10, and once I get in there, I'll just be patient and let the race come to me, and that's what's kind of been happening with Gateway. With the first start, we made kind of a bold move on the outside, got 3 spots. On the restart, did the same thing, another 3 spots, and once I got into 10th, I kind of just settled in and was like, okay, we're going to make smart decisions for the rest of the race and see where we end up. And that was kind of the motto through Toronto, Mid-Ohio, and Pocono as well. So, it's just kind of coming to me. I'm allowing to see the race in a bigger picture now just because I have more and more experience. So that's been helpful. And it's just, IndyCar racing, it's knowing when to be aggressive and when to be patient. And that's just becoming a much clearer picture for me. So I think it's just seat time. Just the more time you're in the car, the more things make sense. My engineer and I are really clicking. We're really getting into our groove now. It's, past halfway like you typically do.
The awesome Garrett Mother said, yes.
Yeah, love Garrett. So it's been good. Everything's kind of coming to us, from pit crew to engineering to me, performing as a driver. So I'm really excited. I wish we could go back and start St. Pete over right now, but, we'll get it next year.
And Christian also says, Emma is your biggest fan. You met her at Mid-Ohio. She would like to know, what is your favorite food, and what is your favorite animal?
Ooh, my favorite animal is actually stingray. Since I've gotten a reef tank, I've been going to aquariums and things because I got a little nephew that's 3. So he gives me a good excuse to go to the aquarium and geek out. And to me, the stingray is like the most majestic animal in the world. It's just, it just looks peaceful. And food, I'd probably say really like sushi. I don't eat it that often, but when I do, it's a good day. So sushi is probably like favorite food for sure.
What kind of sushi? Do you have particular favorites?
See, I'm the very American sushi roll. So I like the sushi rolls with like cream cheese and like the shredded crab meat. That's like my go-to.
Things that would get you kicked out of Japan. Got it. Okay, fair enough.
Exactly. No, it's funny. Felix Rosenquist, when he was my teammate in Indy Lights, I was like, hey, let's go get sushi. And I ordered and he ordered. And he's like, mate, that's not sushi. And I'm like, well,
that's wrong.
Just let me have my life.
Well, since you mentioned Felix, I've said a couple times, our friend Robin Miller said a couple times, we fully expect him to be in the IndyCar Series next year, very likely driving next to one Scott Dixon. As someone who did get a chance to race with Felix for his somewhat abbreviated but winning a heck of a lot Indy Lights season, what kind of talent is that guy playing with?
Man, Felix is one of the best drivers I've ever had the pleasure of working with. So, if I don't want to see anyone booted out for Felix to come in, it's so hard to be in IndyCar as it is. I'm friends with a lot of, drivers in the paddock, but to see Felix come in, it would be really cool. I look forward to having him. But, we'll see what happens. I haven't heard anything from him on that end, but it would be cool. He's definitely been one of my closest friends in racing, so having him competing stateside again would be something I'd be, really cool with.
All right, I lied to you about the last question coming in from Kristen because I found one more that's just too awesome to not use as the closer. Robbie Berggren says, Zach, how many times did your dad blow a hole in the side of the block in his tractor, and what was the biggest diameter hole? There's got to be some stories here.
There a few. Definitely a few. I remember anytime Dad came home and he was super grumpy, I knew something bad happened. And, of course, you'd go out to the shop and you would see, I was 8 at that time, and it was big enough that I could put my entire head in the block and look around and be like, wow, this made quite a mess, So that was very rare. We didn't blow too many blocks out, but over a long time for sure. Honestly, the worst was if you'd blow a blower belt. If one of those would break, it would shatter all the fiberglass on the front end of the truck, and it'd ruin the paint job and the hood, and that was more of a mess. So, my dad always joked, skin heals faster than paint, and it's true because paint never seems to fix itself.
Wow. Well, Zach, you're always a pleasure to have on here, man, and we get to some serious things, we get to learn a little bit, but, man, we also wander down some rabbit holes where they're just glorious. So I might pay Roger Warwick to do my own dang sticker of me as a superhero carrying a cat in a basket just to make you honor that and put it on your helmet for Sonoma.
Oh, just don't make it too big, okay? I mean,
I'll have him do it in the shape of a visor, so it'll just cover up your visor. That's all.
It will be dangerous and inconvenient, but I do love Marshall Pruitt. So
oh, you are a sick puppy, but that's why we love you. Zach, as always, my man, thanks so much for taking some time here, and I know that we always get such great feedback from when you come on, because folks know that they can connect with you and have some fun, and also realize that, yeah, IndyCar drivers are amazing people, they have amazing talents, but there are also some pretty good regular folks as well. So thanks for coming on, my man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and everyone, thanks for listening. We'll see you in Portland.